in the Lyme space for well over a decade now, probably about 15 or so years, primarily because I ended up developing what I defined as chronic Lyme disease. Though I never tested for it, there's no doubt I had Bartonella. I had all the symptoms of it, and I was in pretty bad shape. I had virtually every symptom that I've had anyone else report by age 50. And now at age 64, I have good health, and I've been enjoying health for 8 or 10 years now. So I got it all back. I did not go the conventional route. I did not use antibiotics. I did not go to see a Lyme doctor, and took my care into my own hands, used primarily herbal therapy, and got better. I've researched all the different microbes. I wouldn't define myself as an absolute expert on Bartonella, like someone in a research lab, but the knowledge is there, and it's certainly one that we've been following for years. So I have some good information for you, and it will unveil really how I think about these kinds of microbes, and not looking at Bartonella in isolation, but in conjunction with so many other microbes that we are dealing with. So I'm going to share my screen. That might take a second or two, but we will get started on the presentation. After we finish, there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. So here we go. Let's see if this will work. Is the technology going to be good for us? So here we go. Can everybody see that all right? Have you got my screen okay? Anybody, Perry?
We can see just fine, thank you.
Sure, good. All right, Bartonella, here we go. All righty. So Bartonella is a bacteria. It's a gram-negative bacteria, which means it has a double cell wall. And it is aerobic, which means it needs oxygen to survive, unlike Borrelia that causes Lyme disease, is anaerobic and specifically doesn't like oxygen. So these are two very different bacteria that have a lot of common characteristics. It is a facultative intracellular. So what the heck does that mean? That means it can go both ways as far as living in cells or living outside cells. So when it's inside the body, it lives primarily inside cells, inside tissues. And that's what makes it so darn stubborn to get rid of. But yet outside the body, it can live outside of cells. And this figure of it happening in about 25% of Lyme disease cases, you know, as we test for Bartonella more frequently in Lyme disease, along with other microbes and other species, what we find is it's a lot more common than that. You know, I'm just talking to pretty much everybody that has Bartonella, Babesia, Borrelia, and a long list of others. I think that's probably just scratching the surface. Bartonella is really common in nature, and it is something that you pretty much see everywhere in all mammal populations. So it's even found in whales and dolphins, but certainly cats and dogs and quite a few other animals, and it has multiple hosts. It's not specific to one host. It can thrive in a lot of different organisms. All it needs is a warm body, and it can do fine. So there are a lot of species of Bartonella. It's really common. The two most common that are the most well studied are Bartonella henselae, which is associated with cat scratch fever, and Bartonella quintana, which is trench fever. It's got its name from World War I. Bacilliformis is for Clarion's disease. I think we misspelled that one. It's Carrion's disease. which is spread by sandflies, and it's isolated to South America. It is the most virulent or severe form of Bartonella. Unfortunately, we don't have it here, but we have all these other forms, and they are popping up pretty darn regularly as we start testing for them. So it's spread by insects almost exclusively, but it's spread by a lot of different kinds of insects. Mosquitoes, ticks, and flies, lice, sugars, biting flies, just about everything. If it bites, it can transmit Bartonella. But we're finding this is true of most everything. So everybody's been worried about ticks and Lyme disease. Like, okay, some ticks carry Lyme disease and some ticks don't carry Lyme disease. But every tick, every biting insect, every biting fly carries a wide range of different microbes and different bacteria. They tested one species of tick and they found it carried 237 different genera of bacteria. That's families of bacteria, one tick species. So what we're defining as Lyme disease is a lot more than meets the eye, for sure. There is a lot out there. So Henselae, cat scratch fever, typically it's been about half or more of cats. It's very common in dogs. And it's the symptoms are typically low-grade fever, headache, sore throat. But a lot of people don't get symptoms at all. One of the key characteristics is swollen lymph nodes, and that takes a few months to go down. But even without antibiotics, it typically goes away. All the symptoms are resolved and the person is restored back to normal health. But just because the symptoms are resolved doesn't mean it's gone from the body. And this is true of so many different microbes. It's really common, and it's common in people who are healthy. The carrier rate for this thing is 10 to 30% in most populations around the world. We're still trying to define that because historically, we haven't tested people that are healthy for microbes. And as we start doing that more, we find that an awful lot of people are carrying stuff that aren't sick, which says a lot about the characteristics of these particular kinds of microbes. So the other most common, Quintana. It got its name for World War I, where soldiers were living in trenches and they were covered in body lice, and the body lice spread the bacteria. But I can tell you, it wasn't as much about the body lice and the bacteria as it was that they were under desperate and debilitating conditions that really, really stress their immune system functions. So they were very susceptible to getting these kinds of symptoms. And they got, and what they had was severe fever and headache and muscle aches and pretty much everything. So this particular form of Bartonella is found in cats, dogs, monkeys, gerbils, rats. So have you ever been bitten by a gerbil? Yeah, you could have gotten this microbe. But it's very prevalent now in homeless populations who are debilitated and also have to be concerned about lice. So that is pretty common. All right, so this is a big, complicated slide, and I'll talk you through it, and we'll get to the bottom line, all right? So when this bacteria enters the body, it wants to get to the bloodstream. And this is common with everything. So I've come to appreciate that what an infection is, we think about the infection for the symptoms that we have in this microbe that's trying to make us sick. Turn around the other way. What does a microbe want out of the deal? It wants to eat and reproduce. It needs food. And our cells, the cells of our body, are the food. So, but to get in the body, a microbe has to break through barriers. It's got to break through either the skin or the lungs, or it's got to get inside the body. So a lot of microbes do vector-borne. So something that's a respiratory infection, you generally know about it. A skin infection or a respiratory infection, that microbe is breaking through barriers, causing symptoms because it confronts the immune system. Tick-borne microbes, insect-borne microbes. The insect is injecting the bacteria directly where they want to go, right into the bloodstream. Why do they want the bloodstream? The bloodstream is the highway to all cells in the body. Different microbes like different cells. For people infected with multiple different microbes, they have different symptoms because different microbes have preferences for different cells in the body. So Bartonella likes cells that line blood vessels. So there are certain kinds of immune cells called CD34 cells. And these are precursors to the cells that line our blood vessels, what we call endothelial cells. So when it infects the body, it goes straight for these cells, infects them, takes over, causes more of them to concentrate, infects them, and then disperses. It's called a Trojan horse mechanism, that it basically lives inside this cell and uses the bloodstream to disperse throughout the body. And there it lays down into blood vessels and it becomes part of us. And inside that cell, it can kind of reach out and scavenge blood vessels red blood cells as a nutrient source. So that's that particular microbe strategy. Lives inside cells that are inside blood vessels. And what that does is cause small blood vessel disease because it clogs things up. So this really sounds pretty darn threatening, but these bacteria are not considered highly virulent. So what does virulence mean? The potential of a microbe to cause illness. And this is not about the microbe. This is about the immune system. So all microbes are aggressive, and all microbes want one thing: to eat and grow. That's it. And they'll want to get it any way they can. And all of our host-dependent microbes that are threatening to us want to do that by getting to our bloodstream so they can get to the cells in our body. So that's what these things are trying to do. And they're trying to do it throughout our entire lifetime. Every time we move, every mosquito bite, every tick bite, all of these things are trying to get inside our body. But what happens when these things hit the bloodstream depends on whether the immune system has built-in immunity to them. So if we have built-in immunity, things are less of a threat. Ebola virus is a terrible threat to us. It's really the worst threat on the planet right now, with a mortality of 60%. Compared to that to COVID of 1.5%, 60% for Ebola. Why? It's because humans have never, ever been exposed to it. It stays dormant in a rare spider, and it rarely comes out, and it rarely infects humans. When it does, when it hits the bloodstream, it ravages all cells in the body because there's nothing to stop it. Tick-borne microbes like Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, these things have been around for millions of years, and they've been infecting humans since there have been humans. We only started becoming aware of cat scratch fever in the 1990s, but this bacteria has been infecting humans through all of time. So it is a very, very common microbe. We do have built-in immunity to it. And if our immune system is strong or healthy, often we cut it off in its tracks. But just because it enters the body and makes it, if it can make it to cells, it can maintain a presence without causing us any symptoms at all, and later come out and cause us symptoms. So they're low grade. They're really common. If your immune system functions are good, you're in good shape. After a brief low grade illness, most people are back to full health, even without antibiotics. The acute infection is rarely debilitating. So that's a deal. If something doesn't cause a bad acute infection, it's generally a low grade pathogen. Low-grade pathogens are notorious, however, for maintaining a presence in the body. And as we age and our immune system functions become disrupted, they start becoming active and they start causing us some big time issues. And I can tell you, I dealt with this, so I know all about it. We really don't know the incidence of Bartonella infections because most of them aren't reported. It is a reportable disease. When doctors diagnose it, they are supposed to report it, but typically they don't report it because they don't recognize it, and most people never go to the doctor. So we have no idea what the actual rate is of this infection. If your immune system isn't up to par, though, and typically all the people that I talk to, 95% of people that I've talked to over the past 10 years don't remember a specific tick bite or an acute illness, which is typical of these low-grade pathogens. They do, however, in many cases, most cases, have a perfect storm of factors that come together that disrupt immune system functions, allow these things to flourish, and once that pot starts boiling over, so they're big issues that it just is hard to put it back in its box. So it gains protection from the immune system by invading blood vessels. This is a good deal for the microbes. So even, if you get an infection, even if the immune system is able to mop up most of the microbes, if just a few of them can make it to cells, then that microbe has had some success. And so if it gets to cells, if it courses through the bloodstream and infects those CD34 cells and starts lining blood vessels, then it's pretty good. It can just hang out and wait for an opportunity to spread to another host. But if it becomes more active, it starts damaging those blood vessels and the organs that are supplied by those blood vessels. So typically you have a small vessel disease throughout the body. Every organ is affected. So initial infection with any Bartonella, generally a mild rash at the infection site, sometimes a low-grade fever, lymph nodes, again, that's a big one. Some of them have pus. And then just general symptoms of muscle pain, all the other things. Eye infection is really common, but most of the time, symptoms are mild, they go away. When the symptoms go away, though, doesn't mean the microbes are gone. Chronic infection, once this thing gets in your blood vessels and starts becoming active because your immune system can't contain it anymore, it affects everything because blood vessels reach every organ in the body. So there's liver and spleen enlargement, and it can kind of hang out there. You can have relapsing fever, which is also common with babesia. It does tend to hang out in the eyes, so eye irritation is really common. I could tell when I was having a relapse because I started having blurriness and irritation in my right eye, which I think it's possible with a lot of different microbes, but it is pretty characteristic of Bartonella. Anemia, sometimes, not that often, depends on the bacterial count. So here, what we're talking about is really, really, really low concentrations of microbes. Not very many microbes. You're talking about just a light peppering, right? But to control this thing, what you also have is the immune system. It can't get to the microbes inside cells, but it can kill the cells. And it starts making antibodies to the cells, but it also makes antibodies to normal cells. And that's why the immune system can't typically eradicate these things completely, because if it's too aggressive, getting rid of the cells that have been infected, it damages a lot of normal cells. So it is becoming apparent that we all live in this state that we do have low-grade infections of microbes in our tissues. All of us do. Some are worse than others. You go through life and you don't pick up Bartonella, babesia, and Borrelia and some of the others, yeah, you're probably better off. But we all have stuff, every single one of us. Studies in 2016 and 2017 define that we actually have a microbiome of the brain of hundreds of species of microbes. So we pick things up, they stay in our system, the immune system can't get rid of them because the penalty of eradicating them would be eradicating too many normal cells. So it just tries to keep a thumb on them. You disrupt immune system functions, and these things start becoming more active and infecting other cells, though. And these are the kinds of symptoms that you get because it's affecting blood vessels in all these organs. So something I had, foot pain, just anything, go for a walk around the park and you'd have foot pain, and just weird bone pain down in your shins. I had that. Lots of nervous system things. I don't, it does cause some really strange things. I didn't have as much, but I've certainly seen young people with psychosis and quite a number of things that we think are micro-driven, and part of it being the Bartonella. So definitely rage, depression, quite a number of other symptoms. Demineralization of the teeth and the jaw. This is really interesting. A lot of people ended up having root canals because it affects small blood vessels in the teeth. Pot syndrome, you probably heard of that. It's affected blood vessels, affect the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. So people have a hard time keeping their blood pressure up, and they become faint very easily. And that's all because of this effect on the vascular system. Can infect the heart. I had heart involvement, both muscle and I'm sure valves. Fortunately, cleared it up over time. Shortness of breath, all of these symptoms. I had irritable bladder. One of the things of not getting enough sleep was having to get up and go to the bathroom 3 or 4 times a night. And this is very common in women with pelvic pain. But Bartonella is not the only one. Mycoplasma and a bunch of other microbes cause these kinds of symptoms also. So it affects everything. It affects every part of the body. But again, you can have this thing in your system, in all of your tissues, and not have a symptom. It's only if your immune system is disrupted by various kinds of factors that it becomes a problem. Symptoms are really highly variable. And, it's so common. I'm starting to wonder if, a lot of these kind of low virulence microbes that we define as Lyme disease, I'm seeing connections with a wide range of chronic illnesses. I mean, Bartonella has been found in various kinds of cancer cells. And you start to wonder, well, are some of these vascular changes and other kinds of things that people are experiencing, are they driven like microbes like Bartonella? So all of the Bartonella species can cause some similar symptom profiles. And again, as we are testing for more species, we're finding them. And all the species can cause the same kind of cat scratch fever and trench fever. And all Bartonella species infect a variety of mammals and use different insect vectors. Ticks are certainly on the list. So just getting back to these low-grade pathogens, we hear about all the co-infections, and they all have similar characteristics. They're widely prevalent. They're low-grade pathogens. They're not high-grade threatening pathogens. They tend to have vector-borne relationships. They are host dependent. Initial infection is generally mild, and they're slow growing. They're slow growing because they live inside cells. And so they can stay dormant inside the cell, but they, with time, they cannibalize the nutrients in that cell and then infect other cells. So if the immune system is working well, it slows their growth down a lot. Even if it's not working well, it still slows them down just because of the mechanisms that they reproduce. So that intercellular thing, generally the intercellular microbes are slow growing, which is very different than taking a bacteria and putting it in a food, a petri dish with food in it. They just keep growing as long as food is there, but because they're actually utilizing cells, it makes them slower growing. And the symptoms of chronic infection can be very nonspecific, and depending on what microbe and what kind of tissues it likes in the body. Because there's so many possibilities, then you typically find that everybody is just a little bit different. All of them are highly resistant to conventional antibiotic therapy because they are intracellular, and the antibiotics don't get inside the cells. Diagnosing Bartonella, two basic ways is one, to indirectly diagnose it with antibodies. So there are indirect fluorescence assays that look for antibodies to Bartonella. They're okay. There are several labs that do that. PCR is actually much better for Bartonella. So PCR is a test that detects the DNA of the bacteria in the blood. And just a basic DNA, there's not enough DNA there for it to pick it up. So a company called Galaxy Labs, which is based here in North Carolina, uses an amplified version. So they amplify the DNA. They use mechanisms to make it more pronounced, and then they test for that. So their testing is much more sensitive as far as finding it. I'll tell you right up front, though, the problem with testing for any of these things, and especially in someone who doesn't have a high level of symptoms, is the bacteria are inside cells for the most part. They do emerge and infect other cells, but the bulk of them are inside cells. And inside cells, they're not dying off in the bloodstream that much. And the immune system response by the time you have a chronic infection has been attenuated. So testing in chronic infection is fair at best. Most of the time, I look for characteristics. That thing of just talking to the patient, I found that microbe testing is not something I generally need to do. If I can talk to the patient, I can get a very, very good idea of what is going on in them. So a negative test certainly doesn't rule out the presence of Bartonella. And sometimes you just got to think, well, is it worth spending $600 to $1,000 on a test, or should I just direct that toward therapy that might help me get over it? And the problem is that there are a lot of other possibilities besides Bartonella and many species of Bartonella. Some people with chronic infection respond to conventional antibiotic therapy, but generally it doesn't work that well because these microbes are inside cells and the antibiotics don't get to them. I'm not in the space of really being up on the antibiotic therapy. I know that many physicians are using various kinds of triple therapy. And I also know a lot of people don't get well from that because I talk to them. And the problem is, any antibiotic you use is going to, over time, disrupt gut flora. And when you disrupt gut flora, when you kill the normal flora in the gut, that's the only thing that keeps pathogens in the gut in check. So not only do you end up with gastrointestinal illness with antibiotics from the disrupted gut function, but you also, these pathogens in the gut start crossing the gut-blood barrier, hitting the bloodstream, and they end up in the brain, in joints, in heart, and that's been well proven now. That's been very, very well documented by several studies. So that's a real problem with antibiotics. So short-term infection, yeah, sometimes the antibiotics in a symptomatic individual can make a difference. In addition, somebody with really severe debilitating symptoms, like a young person with psychosis, antibiotics are definitely worth it, but there is an endpoint, and I haven't seen many people get completely well with antibiotics, so I don't consider it the absolute solution for Bartonella in any case, because you're not getting to it. It's slow growing, and it's just not going to be there. As far as treatment goes, if you're having Hertzheimer reactions after a treatment, you're probably, it's not from Bartonella. They have a low potential to cause Hertzheimer reactions, and they typically aren't participating in biofilms like some other bacteria. What I used and what I've helped so many people with is herbal therapy. And herbal therapy can be extremely effective for Bartonella. And we know a lot more about that. You know, I've been in that space of using herbal therapy and helping people use herbal therapy for almost a decade now. And interestingly, this past year, a group of researchers, some of which were also involved in research looking at Borrelia and Bartonella out of Johns Hopkins. This study wasn't out of Johns Hopkins, but it was some of those same researchers. And this was a test tube study because they wanted to know, does the herb actually kill the microbe outside the setting of a living body, and outside any influence that the herbs might be having on the immune system? And what they found is several of the herbs that they checked, Cryptolepis, Juligan's nigra, which is black walnut, and Polygonum capitatum, which is Japanese knotweed, were able to eradicate these bacteria as effectively as any drug therapy. They also looked at other herbs. Some others on the list that worked really well were Chinese skullcap and Andrographis. So there are other herbs out there. And yeah, this study suggests that they really do work as well as the antibiotics. So herbs, I think, are really important. In some cases, sometimes I think herbs and antibiotics are the answer, but I think in every case, herbs as a foundation are always the answer. And the evidence is there to support it. So one of our top herbs that we found is for Bartonella is Cryptolepis, an herb that's now commonly used for malaria. And it's found to have some really wonderful anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and specifically antibacterial properties for Bartonella. Typically a tincture or a standardized extract is how you would use it. It is exceptionally well tolerated, much better tolerated than antibiotics. Japanese knotweed, one of my favorites. Japanese knotweed is a good source of resveratrol, which is, if you recognize that, what comes from drinking red wine and grape seeds. It has a wonderful protective effect on the vascular cells, the cells that make up the vascular system. So wow, what a perfect herb to use in this against this infection that's attacking the vascular system. So it improves the integrity. I mentioned doses here, but I will tell you it really varies very widely depending on what kind of preparation that you use. Really unusual for Japanese knotweed to cause side effects. It was featured in the Johns Hopkins studies. Japanese knotweed was as effective as doxycycline and azithromycin for killing Borrelia. Japanese knotweed was as effective as the drugs, the different drugs that were used for Babesia, which is a protozoa. I've also researched Japanese knotweed and found that it is effective against the SARS virus that causes COVID. So that shows you the difference in the herbs. So what we're getting with an herb is not one chemical, but hundreds of chemicals. And these substances are there to protect the plant and the plant cells. Something that is really remarkably unique about all of our herbs that we're using for treating these kinds of conditions is that they don't disrupt normal flora. Really important. And this is something I recognized over the years, that they just never messed up my gut. In fact, they suppress pathogens in the gut and spare normal flora. That has been documented scientifically. There was a study that I found just a couple of months ago that somebody had done an animal study and documented this fact as scientific evidence. And this is true with all of the herbs. So what that means is you're not going to mess up the gut. You're not going to have side effects. So you can use these things for a long, long time. Do they kill the bacteria inside the cells? I don't think so. I don't think they do any better than we do with antibiotics. But they kill the bacteria when they emerge from cells. But the herbs are doing something else, and this is really, really important. The herbs are protecting cells because all of these herbs have potent antioxidants and substances that neutralize toxins and radiation. So they're protecting the cell. A healthy cell is resistant to invasion by bacteria. So we're vulnerable when our cells are stressed by bad diet and all the things that we do. So the herbs are actually protecting our cells and allowing our cells to recover from stress, which makes them more resistant to invasion by microbes. So not only do these things kill the bacteria, but they also protect cells. And that helps take the load off the immune system because we have less cellular turnover, and that allows the immune system to do its job, which is really important. That makes herbs really special. Now, I've been using herbs for over a dozen years now, and I've been enjoying great health for well over 8 years now. And I don't plan to stop the herbs. So it is a long-term commitment. Other herbs, black walnut, that was one on the study. I don't use black walnut as much. It does tend to have a little bit higher association with side effects such as stomach upset and just making people feel bad. But if you tolerate it, if you can eat black walnuts and you don't have sensitivities to them, which a lot of people do, I think it's a good herb. Cryptolepis, Japanese knotweed by themselves, though, are pretty darn good. The deal with this thing, though, is Bartonella is one of many. So several years ago, I sat down and tried to look for the different kinds of microbes out there that could be present in someone's body without causing infection, but if their immune system became disrupted, could cause chronic infection with similar symptoms to Lyme disease. So we're checking for about half dozen co-infections. It's more like this. There are hundreds of possibilities. That's why I don't do a lot of microbe testing anymore, because there are too many possibilities than we can really field right now. The more they test, the more they find. So I just basically assume that they're there. There are a lot of microbes out there that can cause these kinds of things. So when we look at the overall benefits of herbs, they have broad spectrum of coverage. They suppress this full range of microbes, all of those that we're talking on the list, by bacteria, viruses, protozoa, yeast. You can combine multiple herbs to get overlapping benefit. They support the gut microbiome. They promote optimal immune system functions. They can be used long-term, and they inhibit chronic inflammation. So core herbs that I do for any chronic Lyme disease protocol: Japanese knotweed, top of the list; Andrographis, a wonderful antiviral and a good antiprotozoal against Babesia, cat's claw, Borrelia, and a number of other microbes; Sarsaparilla has some other really nice coverage; garlic, definitely defined as helping out having antibacterial properties. Reishi mushroom, also you'll see on the list, is an immune modulator, really nice for antiviral properties. Chinese skullcap, an excellent herb with a wide range of coverage that's also an immune modulator. And then Cryptolepis, we're adding to regimens more and more often now. Immune modulating herbs. So I don't stop with just antimicrobial herbs, though. I think it's really important to have other herbs that help balance immune system functions. There is an autoimmune aspect to all of these things. And when we, what we mean by immune modulating is they cool down aspects of the immune system that are overactive, like that autoimmune phenomenon and the allergic reaction and inflammation. And at the same time, they enhance the ability of the immune system to go in and do its job, take out microbes. That's what we want to do. So top of my list, Chinese skullcap again. It's also a great antimicrobial. Reishi, cordyceps is another mushroom. Romania is well documented for reducing autoimmunity. Sylvia militarizа or red sage is excellent. Ashwagandha, you may have heard of that one. It's really good for stress. Rhodiola is one of my favorite adaptogens. You don't have to take all of these. I generally recommend that people take 3 to 5 antimicrobial herbs and 2 to 4 immune modulating herbs and rotate them around because we do seem to develop tolerance to everything. You can add on. The vascular system gets hit pretty hard with any Bartonella. Hawthorn is protective of the vascular system, milk thistle of the liver, pine bark extract, excellent for vascular. Red root helps drain the lymphatic system. Kudzu, another vascular. Other antimicrobials that have some benefit for Bartonella, Bidens, Alcornia, Houtonia. And then just other support ingredients like B vitamins, glutathione, N-acetylcysteine. What these things are doing is protecting cells and helping cells function better. So I don't have a high list of nutrients that I use. A lot of doctors like to bombard people with nutrients, vitamins, that sort of thing. But a cell can only use so much of that stuff. And if you load it up then with more than it needs, it can actually be harmful. So glutathione and acetylcysteine, alpha lipoic acid, these substances are more protective, as is L-arginine, which is helpful specifically for the vascular system and protecting the vascular system. I didn't put doses down because it does vary. If you go to my website, Rawls MD, you can find doses for various different products and various different needs. So with that, I will say thank you. And there is an article on Bartonella on my wall on my website, rawlsmd.com, that has information about these herbs and quite a bit of other information about a recovery protocol and things that you can do to get well. So I think that's about all for you. And I would be glad to take any questions that you guys have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rawls. Folks, we didn't receive any questions during the presentation in the chat. So if you want to send a question to the chat, you may. Otherwise, you feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question directly. While folks might be typing here, Dr. Rawls, your website, you said it was rawlsmd.com?
Correct.
All right. I just put that in the chat. Hopefully everyone can see that. No, I think it just went to you.
All right. Very good. So should I take my screen down so we can just see each other?
Sure.
All right. Let me see if I can do that. Okay. There we go.
All right. So it looks like we have a question from Brenda. Does it affect the lymph nodes in the neck much?
It affects all the neck lymph nodes in the body. This is a whole body thing, every bit of it.
Okay. Question from Justine. Is leg pain more specific to Bartonella than Lyme?
Well, I would say probably so, but you've got different kinds of leg pain, all right? So Bartonella is affecting the vascular system, Borrelia is affecting cartilage. So Borrelia is going to tend to affect joints more, Bartonella is going to affect blood vessels, which affects blood supply to muscles. And ruptured blood vessels can cause pain. That's the foot pain and the bone pain. This thing gets into bone. So anywhere that there are blood vessels, that's where you find it. And so it has a very wide range of symptoms. But again, this thing of it being either one microbe or another microbe, it's usually all of the above. Whatever you think you have, multiply it by a factor of somewhere between 10 and 100, and you might be getting in the ballpark.
All right, thanks. Aaron asks about muscle twitches, pins and needles, and numbness. Are those more likely Lyme or Bart?
I don't think anybody can really answer that. It's really common. We all have it. There's no doubt about it. But again, there are different microbes affecting different things. Bartonella is pretty exclusive to blood vessels, but if you irritate all the skin and vascular supply around around nerves, it's going to have an effect. But then we have reactivation of Epstein-Barr and a range of other viruses and other bacteria like Mycoplasma and Borrelia that tend to invade nerve tissue. And so that can cause neurological symptoms directly. It is never one microbe, never one microbe.
Okay, so we're dealing with a hot dish full.
Yep.
Lots of ingredients. Question here from Amy: since Bartonella likes oxygen, is hyperbaric oxychamber treatment is it not helpful?
Yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, people do hyperbaric oxygen thinking they're killing Borrelia, and it's obviously not killing Bartonella. So yeah, some people feel better doing hyperbaric oxygen, but there's certainly no studies that I'm aware of that are looking at treating Bartonella with hyperbaric oxygen and the effect that it might have. Logically, you would say, yeah, it's probably not killing it.
All right. So about the eye issues, are they related more to the eye tissue itself or the muscles surrounding the eye?
It's been a while since I've looked and seen exactly where it invades, but again, it's vascular. So you're going to see an introduction of the bacteria into the vascular system of the eye. So that's going to affect any tissues that are associated with that vascular supply. And basically it's going to inhibit blood flow. So cells are going to be starved for oxygen and nutrients and are going to suffer from that. I think that's what's going on. And because the eye is somewhat isolated from the immune system, or more isolated than some places, a lot of microbes gravitate toward eyes. So Bartonella is far from being the only one.
Thank you for that. 1 second.
Yeah, early on, I could tell when an herb was working because my eyes would clear up, especially my right eye.
That's excellent. So we have a question here. Are there some herbal remedies that combine more than one herb for treatment of Bartonella? And can you recommend one, or would those be more specific to each individual?
No, I mean, I think it's good to start out with a standard regimen. And the nice thing about herbal therapy, again, at this point in time, maybe 20 years or 50 years, we'll be able to truly assay whatever microbes that someone has in their tissues. But right now, we just don't have anywhere close to the capacity. Whatever they're testing for, it's a drop in the bucket of what's possible. So yeah, there's a lot of unknown. The great thing about the herbs is there's a lot of cross coverage. Again, we've had these series of studies from researchers out of Johns Hopkins, and you've got same herbs that are treating Borrelia, which is an anaerobic bacteria that doesn't like oxygen. Bartonella, that's an aerobic bacteria that does like oxygen. Babesia, which is a protozoa, which generally requires a totally different kind of antibiotic, and plenty of different viruses like Epstein-Barr and other viruses. And, so it's like, the herbs have a lot of cross coverage. So standard protocols are really good. If you are looking for references for a specific protocol and one that's been widely used, I would recommend my book, Unlocking Lyme. I took a couple of years of my life to write a book to just really dig through everything I experienced in my journey so that I could help people. So there's an herbal protocol that is well defined in the book. If people that are interested in more of a comprehensive protocol, my company has a program called the Restore Kit at Vital Plan that we do. You have a comprehensive protocol. It's, I tell people it's a foundation. Some people are going to need to add on other herbs, and a lot of that is just trial and error. But it has been my experience that people that work the herbs, and what I mean by that is they're persistent in taking them. They take a full regimen, and if they have relapses or just plateaus, they rotate other herbs in, and they just keep working the herbs and working the herbs, which is what I did. And I finally got to the point where I didn't have to do that anymore. But I'm still taking herbs every day, not as much as I used to. I still take immune modulating and antimicrobial herbs every day of my life. And I just don't have the same kinds of symptoms of aging that most people have.
Excellent. So question here, are there certain precautions when we're dealing with children and herb use?
Honestly, very few. The herbs are very, very well tolerated. And, it's the dose thing. We are so used to being dosed with drugs. So most of our drugs are therapeutically dosed poisons. We're blocking processes in the body to slow disease down and inhibit symptoms. And the problem with that is you take too much and it's going to make you sick, or possibly even kill you in some cases. When you're talking about herbs, especially the kind of herbs we're talking about, what we've got here is we are embracing the defense system of the plant. So plants don't have an immune system. They've got a complex chemical system that we call phytochemicals, that they are using chemistry to protect themselves from free radicals, from toxic substances, from every kind of stress, and especially from microbes. So when we take the herb, we are taking in that basic defense system of the herb. Now, the deal is, it's true, there are certain plants that you just wouldn't want to get a hold of. Poison ivy is a great antimicrobial, but we don't eat poison ivy. The herbs that we have been using are things that humans have been using for thousands upon thousands of years. And we know that these things are very well tolerated. They're very compatible with our chemistry, so that they really have a very low potential to cause adverse reactions. Not to say that somebody couldn't have an unusual reaction or have an allergy to an herb, but the incidence of that is very, very low. It is very uncommon. Which makes herbs really special and easy to use. So kids, we start at a low dose and we gradually move up until we get to a point that they are getting better, and continue them until they don't have symptoms. But the toxic dose of these things is really high. I was looking at an extract from one of our herbs that we use recently. And they had done toxicology studies in mice just to see, well, what is the toxic dose? How much would a human have to take of these things? And for that particular herb, and it's pretty similar to most other herbs, that particular herb, it would be 3,000 capsules a day. 3,000 capsules a day, not 3,000 milligrams, 3,300 milligram capsules a day, if you can imagine taking that. And that's what it would take to really, really get deathly ill from taking the herbs. So they're pretty darn forgiving.
Well, that's great. Is there a risk of killing off good microbes and bacteria through herb use?
Yeah, again, it's just not something that we see. I mean, you have to think about it this way. When we take an antibiotic, we're taking one chemical that's designed to kill bacteria. When we take an herb, we are embracing the plant's defense system. And it's a system, not a single agent. So plants have to take care of their normal flora. They want to kill the pathogens and not kill the things that are friendly to the plant. So that is something that I noticed, that I was not able to tolerate antibiotics because they disrupted my gut so badly. I went to herbs and my gut just kept getting better. And it was one of those things that early on, I would get to be about 80% better and I'd go, maybe I've been on these things long enough, and I would stop. And then a stress would come along and I would be right back where I started. And finally, I just said, I'm not having any gut issues. I'm just going to keep taking these things. And I kept looking for other people to have gut issues, and we just don't see it. And then that study came out a couple of months ago demonstrating that a variety of different herbs actually enhance the balance of the microflora in the gut. So no, typically people's skin and gut get better on herbs.
All right, thank you. Super. Okay, this next one's a little long, but there's a lot of detail here, so I'll try to do it justice. So we're talking about an 8-year-old with tick-borne illness, potentially congenital. Both her parents had resistant infections of Lyme, Babesia, Bartonella, and M. fermentans.
Yeah.
The mother was treated very aggressively during pregnancy, but Babesia, an unknown species, was found in her cord blood at birth by IGeneX and MDL. She was essentially healthy to 5 years when she had sudden onset sensory processing disorder, bladder issues, leg cramping, and PANS-like neurological inflammation, leading to behavior changes, anger, impulse control, etc. She has since tested positive for Bartonella in addition to the Babesia. She does not ever test positive for Lyme. Despite many herbs and antibiotics, over several years, she is still symptomatic. When ABC are stopped, she relapses, I should say. Do you think Bartonella would account for this situation, or are we missing something? She has been removed environmentally from mold and eats no gluten, no dairy, and it's a low inflammation diet.
Yeah, well, you're correct. And the short answer is I do consults. I do online consults. I do not manage medications. I do not prescribe medications, but I do help people get their lives back. So if you're interested in that, that is available at my website, Rawls MD. Yes, I think, obviously you have concerns about Bartonella and Babesia, but I'll say up front, it's never just those microbes. And this idea that we test for the microbes that are making us sick and we blast those microbes with antibiotics until we get well so we can eradicate them from our body is a myth. And it's never just one microbe or a few microbes. What is happening is disruption of that person's immune system. And that person's immune system has probably had some insults from the very beginning. Sometimes the microbes can be a huge part of that keep the immune system in disarray. And for those individuals, what I can tell you, of all therapies, the lowest potential for harm is herbs, and the highest potential that they are going to provide benefit is going to come from herbs, not from antibiotics. There is very little evidence that long-term antibiotic therapy for these chronic infections do any good. Some people do get well, but it's a rare exception, in my opinion.
So following up on that, here's a question from me. This is all very hopeful, what you've discussed in the herbal approach, and you talk about successes. Have you found individuals that just don't respond to herbal remedy when they do in fact have Bartonella?
We don't always know when people do have Bartonella. Again, what I'm finding is it's a lot higher than 25%. And I don't always do testing because testing is very expensive for most people. And it is often short-sighted. I just assume that it's there. And with the herbal therapy, you can make that assumption. You can cover for Bartonella, you can cover for Borrelia, you can cover for Rickettsia, you can recover for Epstein-Barr reactivation. You can cover for all of it, all at one time. And that makes the detailed testing less necessary. Not necessarily irrelevant. I think that we do need to know everything we can know, but the problem with the testing is that it's limited. There are just so many things out there that we're not testing for. And testing for bacteria that are buried deeply inside cells, inside tissues in chronic illness is limited at best. So it's rare that we know everything that we're dealing with. Herbal therapy, we've been doing this a while. I set up a protocol that we call the Restore Kit. I guess it's been about 8 years or so ago. We have crossed the mark a few months ago of 10,000 people having used that protocol, most of them not using antibiotics, but we have not been able to do a formal study. It's just not practical. You know, those kinds of studies cost a lot of money to implement. But we have been doing surveys because there's a program that goes along with it that people stay in a program for 6 months, and we send out survey to define, are they getting better? And of course, everybody didn't fill out the survey, even though we encourage them to. But of the people that fill out the surveys, 75% of them report significant benefit within 4 to 6 months. There's nothing out there that can come close to that.
Excellent. So you did provide some herbs that people, a couple different sets of herbs that people could start to try to take to help improve their health. When we go shopping, is there a specific, or are there specific manufacturers or purity levels that we should be looking at?
Yeah. Well, I eventually dissolved my medical practice because I found that I wasn't helping people, that it cost a lot of money to do tests, and the types of procedures that are done in offices just to keep offices open are very, very expensive. And I found that the more that I just talk to people, the more that I help them get well. And you don't get reimbursed for talking to people, especially if you accept insurance. So I created a company that we started, looking for and searching out these extracts. So ours is one company. There are others. And just when you're looking at herbs, there are 3 basic commercial preparations. So one is a whole dried herb powder. So if you go to a basic health food store and you find something, it's an herb for $14, that's what you're getting. They basically take the herb, dry it, crush it up into a powder, and put it in a capsule. And what you're getting is mostly fiber. They're not very potent at all. The next step up from that is doing an herbal tincture. So a tincture, they take the plant parts and soak it, and it depends on how much plant they put between in the water and the alcohol. That extracts the chemical, then they discard the plant parts. So you do it as a tincture, low liquid drops. And typically for most of them, you're doing anywhere from 6 to 8 herbs, and you're doing a dropper full to 2 dropper fulls of each one of those in a day, or a couple of times a day. And tinctures are very good. I use a lot of tinctures, but I prefer standardized powdered extracts. So what a standardized powdered extract is they take the water alcohol tincture, spray it on a surface, dry out the water and alcohol, collect the powder, mix it with just a little bit of the whole herb powder for consistency, and put it in a capsule. And that one capsule can be the equivalent of, depending on the extraction, the equivalent of a half a bottle of tincture. So they're really very concentrated. That's how we found to get the most, the highest concentration of phytochemicals of the herbs in people, the most efficient way. And so they are typically standardized to, they'll pick one of the chemicals, the phytochemicals, and standardize that. And so then you have a reference point to compare other extracts to look for what's the potency of that powdered extract. And in our work, we do 3 different levels of testing to make sure that it is the correct species, that there are no contaminants, that, you know, that it is the concentration that we're looking for. So we not only look for extracts that have been tested, but we do independent testing to make sure that that is actually accurate. And so we know we're getting a good product. Not all companies do that, but there are out there. One of the best companies I know of for tinctures is one called Woodland Essence, but there are other ones too. And I've used a variety of different ones.
Thank you very much for that. I do not see any other questions coming through on the chat. So and it's been 10 minutes, 15 minutes or so since the last question came through. So I think we've probably run our course here.
Awesome.
So before we sign off here, I do want to remind folks once again that next Tuesday, September 21st at 6:30, there will be a support meeting. October 12th, there will also be a support meeting, both of those at 6:30. And then on November 9th, mark your calendar for a presentation by Dr. Joe Burriscano. All right, I don't have any other information about what Dr. Burriscano's presentation is about, but I do want to take this opportunity to thank you, Dr. Rawls. This has been fascinating.
My pleasure.
And we've gotten very many complimentary comments in the chats, thanking you for your good work and for this great presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me, and everyone take care and stay well. Do what it takes to get well. You can get there for sure. All right.
All
Bye,
right. Thank
everybody.
you.